A rental of a new BMW 7 Series for less than a Chrysler 300? Oh yeah, next on Autopilot. Today, on a snowy day in New York, I'm thinking back to our trip a couple weeks ago to Los Angeles, where we had a great time seeing family and seeing a lot of the sights, including the Petersen Automotive Museum, which I highly recommend for anyone who lives in the LA area or is traveling there. The Petersen is an amazing and eclectic collection of cars, everything from significant Hollywood movie cars to race cars and historically significant cars. On display now, you can see various generations of Batmobiles. You can also see the original Interceptor from the first Mad Max movie, and also one of the cars from the more recent Mad Max movie, and also the Mach 5 from Speed Racer. There's currently also a display of Chip Ganassi team race-winning cars, including cars that have won the Indy 500 and Le Mans. It was especially cool to see the recent Le Mans winning Ford GT there. Not cleaned up at all from the race, just as it had finished the race, complete with all of the road grime all over the front end, bug splatter, and tire rubber marks. So I highly recommend a trip to the Petersen. It's especially important for enthusiasts like us to support museums like the Petersen to make sure that they stay open. In planning for our trip to Los Angeles, I started looking online for a rental car. I was looking for a full-size SUV or a large sedan that would be adequately sized for our family of four and our luggage. However, large SUVs like a Tahoe or Yukon or Expedition were outrageously expensive through the major rental car companies. I then started looking at something like a Chrysler 300, which was much more reasonably priced, and then was surprised to see through Enterprise that a Mercedes S-Class was actually renting cheaper than the Chrysler 300. After looking the listing over closely to make sure that it wasn't a mistake or a gimmick, I went ahead and booked it. So we arrived in Los Angeles and took the rental car shuttle bus the short drive to the Enterprise location. The part of Enterprise that rents these cars that are out of the mainstream is called Enterprise Exotics, and it's right there attached to the main Enterprise location. You walk through a set of doors, and right there are Corvettes, Maseratis, an Audi R8 convertible, V10, so a lot of very cool stuff. It turns out that the Mercedes S-Class was not available, so they substituted a 2019 BMW 740i instead with only 2,500 miles, and I thought, great, even better. The BMW drove very nicely for such a big car. It was my first time driving this current generation of BMW 7 Series, and I was very impressed. It obviously soaked up the bumpy LA city streets without a problem, and had very, very decent acceleration, given the fact that it was the turbo inline 6 and not the V8 that would be in the 750. But again, I think that turbo 6 from BMW that's throughout the 3, 5, and 7 series is definitely underrated from the factory. Definitely makes more power than they list. The 7 Series was roomy and comfortable, obviously not as roomy as a Chevy Tahoe, but still roomy enough for our needs for the trip. And despite its size, it did not embarrass itself on twisty roads such as Laurel Canyon Boulevard, which we took headed north up over past Mulholland Drive. The tech features in the car were interesting. The center gauge cluster is quite nice, the way it can be configurable and display navigation info or a map right in front of you in that gauge cluster, which is very, very helpful if you're in an unfamiliar city or navigating someplace that you're not familiar with. Makes it very, very easy, and it's very intuitive. Also, it has the fairly new gesture control in which you can wave your finger to change the volume on the stereo or do other assorted features, which is a little bit gimmicky but was kind of fun to play with. It didn't take long, though, for me to see that this extreme tech could be a little bit counterproductive. The first thing I noticed was the odd behavior of the rear seat belts. As we were leaving my brother-in-law's house, my daughter in the back seat was trying to put her seatbelt on and couldn't get it to release from the seat. It was locked and would not release at all. She tried several times, I tried several times, I had her get out of the car. We just couldn't get it to release. It was completely locked. I tried turning off the ignition, turning the car back on, still nothing. After a while, I figured it might have something to do with the fact that the car was parked on a driveway that's very heavily sloped. Didn't know if it was some strange safety feature, so got everyone out of the car. I backed the car out to a more level part of the street, and sure enough, the seatbelt then released. Why this is a feature or the reasoning behind this, I'm not entirely sure, but that's what was going on. It was in that sloped driveway that I then discovered another strange intervention from a safety system in the car. As I started backing down the driveway, the rear parking sensors started alarming as the street was approaching due to the slope of the driveway. This wasn't such a surprise, but what did catch me by surprise was the fact that the car all of a sudden emergency braked and the car stopped and would not move at all. It refused to move as I was right down at the junction of the driveway and the street. Bizarre. Most cars these days have some type of parking sensor on the front or back or both, which obviously can be a big help to guide you as you're parking in a tight space to prevent screwing up the front lip of the car on a curbing or accidentally hitting someone by backing up a parking spot, either a car or a person walking suddenly behind you. Certainly a safety feature that has been welcomed over the years. What's newer though is the active intervention of cars in applying brakes as these radar-based systems detect what they think is a potential threat or issue. These automatic collision avoidance systems then can have unintended consequences, can result in something that's simply annoying, such as having trouble backing out of the driveway, or it could lead to something that's really startling and potentially dangerous. My 2017 Audi S3 that I had prior to the BMW M2 had a particularly sensitive frontal collision warning system with automatic braking. There's a road that I travel fairly frequently close to the house that has a downslope that then flattens out. The radar in the front of the car would detect that as I would approach the flatter part of the road as an object that I was approaching at a relatively rapid speed, because the traffic flows at 35 to 40 miles an hour in that part of the road. It would sense the road coming up to meet the car, as it were, as a potential threat, and it would alarm all the time and occasionally would actually apply the brakes, which would be very startling and, again, potentially dangerous. And my new M2 competition here has done something similar to me with its frontal collision warning system. When driving in an area with relatively dense traffic, such as what we experience here on Long Island, or really in any metropolitan area where there's relatively tightly packed traffic that flows together in a tight pack, the radar system can detect a car that is close to you as potentially being something that's going to be a hazard and apply the brakes. And this car frequently will flash the little red warning symbol in the dash and occasionally has tapped the brakes on me, which again can be a real issue if you're in heavy traffic and you have someone relatively closely behind you, and it surprises you and surprises the person behind you when all of a sudden the car takes control and taps the brakes. I don't tailgate people. That's a pet peeve of mine, so I don't do that. I want to leave a safe distance between myself and the car in front of me. But again, in a dense urban environment such as this, the cars are going to be traveling close enough together that some of these sensitive warning systems might trigger inappropriately. So most of these systems can fortunately be adjusted in terms of their sensitivity or just turned off. In the case of the BMW in Los Angeles, I figured out through the iDrive settings to turn off the automatic braking portion of it so I could actually get out of the driveway and we could go on to dinner. With my M2, I also found in iDrive settings that there are 3 different sensitivity levels for when it will intervene in terms of being concerned about a potential collision in front. But the problem is, if these systems aren't sophisticated or smart enough to differentiate a true hazard from a false alarm, and you don't have the ability to change the sensitivity on them, you'll be tempted to just turn them off altogether, which then becomes a problem because then they're inactive in those situations when you would truly need them. Furthermore, I think the proliferation of these safety systems might actually be causing the general public to become less safe in their driving. I think it encourages people to be more complacent, pay less attention to their actual driving, more tempting to text and pay attention to other things in the car instead of actually focusing on driving. because overall you have a feeling of safety, that these safety systems are monitoring everything, watching out for you, and you don't have to be worried about it. It's all over TV with advertising for all the major car manufacturers. You could see it, that it's encouraging almost this kind of behavior that don't worry about it, everything is going to be fine because the car is monitoring and the car is going to automatically brake, which I really think is the wrong message to be sending. I think overall as a population we need to be paying more attention to our driving than we already are. As an important aside, these automatic braking systems are becoming more and more common on cars that are brought to track days, whether they be BMW M3s and M4s or Corvettes or whatever the more modern car is that has these systems in place. And I've actually seen a lot of talk on the forums amongst instructors at DE events and track days that are very concerned about them, and appropriately so. If these systems are active in a car on track, you can imagine what the problem would be. Again, in a tight pack of cars traveling at high speed, which can happen and happens frequently in a track scenario, but is safe because everyone's paying attention and has situational awareness, these radar-based systems are not going to be able to distinguish that from a pending collision. And so they can automatically apply the brakes at horrible times, whether it be as you're approaching a car to pass, or you're approaching a part of the track that has elevation change and you're going up a hill or down a hill. If they automatically apply the brakes, it can totally throw off the balance of the car, startles you as the driver. It can also throw off the balance of the car when the car might be fully loaded up and on the edge of traction anyway. It could cause an accident, and certainly will startle the driver behind you, who could be going very, very fast, and all of a sudden your car automatically brakes suddenly, which is out of your control, totally startles them, and they can end up spinning. So very much a real concern on track, and these systems should be disabled during a track day. So I feel that overall technology has brought us to this awkward intermediate stage where these safety systems are increasingly taking away control and autonomy and responsibility from us as drivers, but they're not to the point where completely foolproof, fully self-driving cars are being realized. As a result, we're starting to pay less and less attention to the act of driving and what's actually around us, and yet we still are ultimately responsible for being in control. I'm definitely interested to hear all of your thoughts on this. Please leave your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell for notifications for future videos to come. See you guys next time.